Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is Don Mates, a veteran of World War II. He served in the 3rd Division of the U.S. Marine Corps and is a veteran of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Don, thank you very much for your time with us today.
Uh, Glad to be here.
Let's start, obviously, at the very beginning. Where were you born and raised?
I was I was I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, February 10th, 1926. Calvin Coolidge was president.
And did your family have a history of military service of any kind?
No. But when I had two brothers that served, one in the Navy and one in the Air Force, and of course I served in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II. They were younger than me, and they served after in the Korean and Vietnam.
And were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted
Why did you choose the Marine Corps?
in 1943. A recruiter came to John Hay High School in Cleveland, Ohio, and he said, "You're 17 years old and you're going to turn 18. They're going to draft you. Why don't you enlist in the Marines? We'll let you graduate from high school, and you can pick what job you wanted in the Marine Corps." And I said that I'd consider it, and my parents had to sign, and they signed. And he told me that, and he asked me before I signed what I would like to do in the Marines. And I asked him I'd like to first get the dress blue uniform. And he told me that they only issued the dress blue uniform to seagoing Marines, band members, Marine Corps band, the Drum and Bugle Corps, and to embassy guards. And I told him that I got seasick and that I didn't play an instrument. Could I be an embassy guard? And he says, well, he said, you're 6'2", you're in shape. He said, I'll put that down as your first choice. And he said to me, where would you like to serve? And I said, I knew that Portugal was neutral, and I knew they had two colonies. One was Goa in India, and one was Macau in China. And Macau interested me because of the gambling and the nightlife that went with it. And he says, well, then I'll put down Macau as your first choice, and Portugal is your second choice. Well, I want to tell you, to this day, I'm looking for that recruiter. That's how I joined the Marines. I joined it for the uniform, which I never did get till the end of the war.
Did you ever get to Macau?
Never got. I haven't been there yet.
So
That's how I ended up in the Marines.
where did you do your training?
Because I did my boot camp training in Paris Island, and from Paris Island, because it helped that I was an Eagle Scout, and they assigned me to a very high-sounding job, and it was Combat Intelligence School. Basically, Combat Intelligence School is nothing but a scout and observer. And that lasted 8 weeks. And they taught you how to operate a 560 radio. They taught you demolitions. They taught you map reading. And they taught you a little Japanese, which was useless. The nighttime patrolling, which actually, when it was in combat, we did do that. Rubber boat reconnaissance, which we never did. The frogmen in the Navy did that. And that's where I was trained. We also were taught how to operate a 50 caliber and 25 caliber machine gun, a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, and of course the M1 rifle, which every Marine had, even the cooks and bakers.
Was there any particular part of that that you found the most interesting or hoped you would be doing when you were deployed?
Well, I was really brainwashed by during World War II by the movies, by the newspapers, the radio, magazines, posters, and I really believed that the Japanese were super evil, and we were super good, and that I was just I don't want to say snowed, but I was just psychologically affected, never dreaming of what I was getting into. It was the propaganda that got to me, and I was just looking forward to being a Marine and going into combat, never dreaming that anything could happen.
So after training, how much of a time span was there between that and being deployed?
Oh, after training, it was I immediately went overseas. But even going overseas, I left Norfolk on the ship called the Florence Nightingale, and we were going through the Panama Canal. But our first stop was in Cuba, where we got liberty. And Cuba was quite a place for liberty in the 1940s. And then we stopped in Panama, got liberty in Panama. And then I went to a replacement depot in Hawaii. And I thought, my God, this is just a marvelous, exactly what I expected. And it wasn't a celebrity cruise, but it was the Navy treated you royally. You could sleep on deck, and you could eat anytime you wanted or have coffee anytime you wanted. All you had to do was stand in line. So it was just up until that point, it was marvelous, and it got even better when they sent me to Guam, which was being liberated by the 3rd Marine Division. They sent me with 3 other replacements, and we went by aircraft carrier, and that's like a cruise. I mean, even had an ice cream bar there, everything but a nightclub on the ship, and that was a 8-day short-term cruise, and then the proverbial hit the fan when I landed at Guam. Then I knew that it wasn't like the movies.
And where are we on the calendar at this point?
We're into, they invaded in July. And July 24th is the decoration, is their, they celebrate July 24th as the day that we invaded and the Japanese lost control. And their July 24th is our July 4th. And I hit about July 28th, and I was immediately sent to the reconnaissance company that I had trained for, and we were sent not into the lines, we were sent to the northern end of the island, and the big fighting was in the southern end of the island. We were sent to Retidian Point, and that's where we did our fighting, and that's where we went into our combat. That's where we set up booby traps and ambushes, and as they were being driven north, we were up there waiting for them as they came up from the south, the Japanese, and it wasn't a pretty picture.
What type of action were you witnessing?
It was mostly patrolling, and at that point they hadn't been that far north, the Japanese, but you still had to be aware of booby traps, and you had to be aware of mines, and as the Japanese fled north, there was no taking prisoners on either side. It was kill or be killed. And we got into some firefights, We got into a lot of grenade throwing. We didn't have any heavy artillery, but we had a 25 millimeter and 50 millimeter machine guns. The only good point about Retidian Point was the rations were K rations and C rations were nothing to write home about. But what we did was we would throw grenades into the ocean, and we'd stun the fish, and then we'd take the newest replacement, have them strip, go out and get the fish, and we'd eat either fresh fish, raw, and we ate anything that came up except if it had spikes on it, that was poisonous. Or we'd have a fish fry. And that was the only pleasurable part about fighting up on Retidian Point, was we could break loose a little bit.
Just about a minute left before we take our first break. How difficult was it to adjust to combat? You had obviously gone through a lot of training, but when you hit the real thing...
Well, you realize it's not like the movies. And it's the old story where there were 100 of us there, and if they asked for 98 volunteers, and that they asked for 100 volunteers, and they told that only 2 of you were coming back, and there were 98 casualties. Well, you looked around to see who the other lucky fellow was. You never dreamed, or you never dreamt that anything would happen to you. So when something happened to one of your buddies, it comes as a shock, and it's you become anxious, you become stressed, and it's there's a smell. There's a couple smells that you don't get over, and that's the smell of fresh blood coming out of somebody. If somebody's artery is cut and the blood gushes out, there's nothing you can do about it. That odor of sweet blood stays with you. And the other odor is that of a decaying body. We never buried the Japanese, and their bodies just decayed. Even to this day, if I drive by a cemetery and if they're using recycled water, I think I can smell the dead bodies. Those are 2 smells you never get over with.
Don, let's pause right there. When we come back, we'll hear more of your story about your service in World War II in the Pacific, and specifically Iwo Jima. We're talking with Don Mates, veteran of the 3rd Infantry Division of the U.S. Marine Corps, veteran of Iwo Jima. This is Veterans Chronicles. Our guest on Veterans Chronicles this week is Don Mates. He's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II, veteran of Guam, as we heard in the last segment, as well as Iwo Jima, which we'll get to shortly. Don, you were just talking about your service on Guam and some of the memories and even the sense that will stay with you for the rest of your life. At this point, how much bonding had you done with your group, and at this point had you met Jimmy Trimble, who we'll talk about a lot more as time goes on?
Well, Jimmy Trimble and I met in the States. And the bonding that goes on in the Marine Corps stays with you till the day you die. I volunteer at a VA hospital in Florida, in West Palm Beach. And if I see a Marine standing in line waiting, I'll pull him out of line and get him to his appointment immediately. I'm the commander of the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and I make a special effort. Not that I don't help as many people as I can, but I make a special effort with the Marines. And it's true, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And Jimmy and I became close, very close, because 1, we were tent mates after Guam was secure, and 2, he was a Major League Baseball pitcher. He had signed with the Washington Senators, And in 1943, Clark Griffith gave him a $5,000 signing bonus and sent him to Duke and paid for his college. He didn't send him to a farm team. He would play for the Duke baseball team. Well, Jimmy kept the $5,000, went to Duke for about a week, and then enlisted in the Marines. And Jimmy and I went through combat intelligence school together. We went overseas together. And we were the best of buddies. And we were tent mates. And because he was an outstanding pitcher, and our commanding general, Erskine Graves, was a baseball nut. And we had 6 Marine divisions in the Pacific. And among the 6 divisions, there was a round-robin World Series. And General Graves wanted to win that World Series. And lo and behold, General Graves really, when Jimmy pitched the winning game and we won the Marine Corps World Series, he became a favorite of the general. And the general said to him, "I want you to be my bodyguard." And he says, "Pick whoever you want." And of course, Jimmy picked me. So I just tagged along and got some of Jimmy's glory rubbed off on me. And we became bodyguards for General Erskine, which just meant when he was in his tent sleeping, we were outside. When he was in the seat, when he was awake, we were awake. When he was asleep, we took turns sleeping. So that's how I ended up with Trimble, and being my fast buddy and also my combat buddy. You team up in a foxhole. And Trimble was in the foxhole with me.
We're right about at the time that we record this, about the 70th anniversary of the start of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Where were you and what did you do between Guam and February of 1945 when you went to Iwo Jima?
Well, the first thing we did was we trained, but because of the job that I had, I didn't have to do any practice landings. The most I had to do was an occasional patrol to look for stray Japanese. And the 3rd Reconnaissance Company consisted of 4 platoons. And one platoon, the 4th Platoon, was spun off, even though it was part of the Reconnaissance Company, and was assigned to General Graves. General Graves didn't want information coming up through the chain of command. When he wanted to know something, whether it was on the island of Guam or about a patrol, he wanted a first-hand report from the participants. So our platoon was assigned to him specifically. We were at his beck and call. What the Swiss Guard is to the Pope, we were to General Graves. So we didn't participate in all the rugged training that the other troops did. We were in shape, but we had it pretty easy because of our position.
By the time the Battle of Iwo Jima started, obviously the Allies were doing very, very well in the Pacific. Did you have a pretty good sense of that, where you were, that the tide of the war in the Pacific was clearly in your favor?
Yeah, well, of course, we were taking island after island, and we were basically inflicting heavy casualties on the Japanese. And to be truthful, I personally didn't have the big picture. I had no idea that MacArthur was going to swing to the east and come up through the Philippines, and that was where he was headed, and then we were to go to the west and do island hopping. Napoleon once said that the soldier in his army, his view of the big picture was the pack on the back of the soldier in front of him. And that's sort of covered my view of World War II. I didn't really have a big picture. All I knew was what my job was and what I knew was going on, where I was at. I had no idea of the stepping stones, and that Okinawa would be next, and that they were planning to invade Japan, and that Peleliu and Tarawa were taken because of the airfields, and none of that came through to me. I found out about Iwo Jima and Guam after I got out, and I read all about it. I found out what I was involved in. But when you're a private pushing to become a PFC, making $30 a month, you're just concerned where your next meal's coming from, what it's going to be, and who's the unfortunate fellow that's going to get shot instead of you.
Don, we'll pause right there. When we come back, our final segment, and we'll learn all about your role in the Battle of Iwo Jima right after this on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus. This is Veterans Chronicles. We're honored to be joined today in studio by Don Mates, a veteran of World War II, veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. Sir, just before the break, we were leading right up to the beginning of the Battle of Iwo Jima, which began on February 19th. You went ashore on the 24th. What was the state of the battle at that point, and describe coming ashore?
Well, first we were sent ashore to set up sleeping quarters and a CP for General Erskine. And when we landed on the beach, it was just absolute chaos. I thought I had seen quite a bit in Guam, but this came as a shock. They hadn't yet started to bury any of the bodies. They were bloated, there were maggots, there were parts of bodies, there were people, Marines that had no head, missing legs, there was broken equipment, there was wounded lined up on the beach like railway ties. It was just utter chaos, and it seemed like the one with the loudest voice was the one that was in command. We set up Erskine, and again, his bodyguard. We were Trimble and I, and the Japanese had spigot mortars, and a spigot mortar is bigger than a 55-gallon oil drum. It's just loaded with explosives. It's rocket propelled, and it tumbles. After the rocket burns out, it reminds you of reminded me of the Roadrunner in cartoons. You may see it occasionally now on TV, the kids may, where the Roadrunner looks up and a piano is going to fall on him and crushes him, or a truck runs him over and he's flattened out. Well, that's how you felt when you saw this tumbling 55-gallon oil drum coming towards you. It blew a tremendous hole in the ground, and there wasn't much shrapnel, but the concussion was horrible. And if you were close enough, you'd bleed from the ears, you'd bleed from the nose, your brain really got rattled. And one landed near Erskine. And he, up until that point, the recon company had not been, you could get shot anywhere on Iwo. It was 2x4. They put 30,000 of us ashore, and there were 21,000 of them. So you could just throw a grenade anywhere and you hit something. In fact, when we got ashore, I threw a phosphorus grenade into a spider hole, or spider trap, and Trimble yelled to me, he says, "Look behind you." And the smoke from the phosphorus grenade came out behind me. And they had 17 miles of tunnels throughout, and they could scurry everywhere. They figured the battle would last 3 days, and of course it lasted from February 19th till March 27th. Anyway, Erskine wanted to find out where these spigot mortars were coming from. They were coming night and day. And he said that you could see them better at night. So he asked for our lieutenant, Stack, and our company commander, Oscar Selgo, Lieutenant John Stack. He asked for 8 volunteers, and I'll never forget them. There was Warren Garrett. He was the old man of the outfit. He was 24, had 2 children. There was Trimble, there was me. There was Corporal Reed. He was in charge of the patrol. There was McCluskey. Never did find his body. There was Nitzel. He died of wounds. There was Jim White. And there was Lee Blanchard. Lee Blanchard stayed in the Marines and became a colonel. And we set out on February 28th to look for these spigot mortars and see where they were coming from. And then we had a radio with us. McCluskey was the radio man, and we strung the wire. And we went to a ridge between, there were 2 hills, 362 and 382. And, excuse me. And there was a ridge line. And we went to the top, to the ridge line, and it overlooked an open mine sulfur pit. And when a shell would come and land in the sulfur pit, it would ignite the sulfur. It was a big open pit, and off to the right was the village of Moriyama, where the civilians had lived. And I don't know how they did it, but they raised pineapples on Iwo Jima, and the volcanic ash is unbelievable. And we set up on the top. We set up around 6 o'clock in the evening. We set up 2 men on the top of the ridge with the radio. Then we dropped down 50 feet. On top was Reed and McCluskey. Next came Netzel and Warren Garrett. Then came Trimble and me. And down at the bottom was Jim White and Lee Blanchard. Well, at midnight we were to shift every 6 hours. And there was always to be 1 man awake and 1 man asleep. Well, nobody ever did go to sleep, because just before we were to switch, the Japanese started to infiltrate and come up the ridge. Now, years ago they made a movie, a Sherlock Holmes movie. It was called The Hound of Baskervilles, and I think they remade it with Robert Downey on some series, BBC. But the story was on the moors in Scotland, this fog would come up at night, and there was a huge hound that was in this fog, and he would come bounding out and kill people. Well, Sherlock Holmes was called in to solve the problem. Anyway, that's how I felt on Hill 362 and on the ridge in 382. I was waiting for this hound to come bounding out of the sulfur fumes. But what came out of the sulfur fumes were the Japanese who were coming at us. Now, mind you, there were 8 of us. And behind us, and we were in front of a mortar platoon So we were right there in the front lines. And the Japanese had something that a few of us have seen on Iwo Jima. Not all outfits had it. They had on the back of their neck, they had a little pin, phosphorus pin. And with just a little moonlight or starlight, their officer could see his men and how they moved. We couldn't see the pin because it was on the back of their neck. But what happened was, at one point, a little bit after midnight, we turned around. And if you turned around and looked and you saw the pins, then we knew we were in big trouble. And the battle lasted about, hand-to-hand combat, about 3 hours. And thank God we had grenades the way we did. But what happened was, as I said, Reed, he was married. He had been stationed in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. He was bayoneted. McCluskey, they never found his body. Nitzel, he died of wounds received. Garrett, for some reason, the Japanese bayoneted him, and they took his rifle and left their rifle. Just something symbolic. Trimble and I did the best we could to hold them off. And as I said, the grenades came in handy. And there was no talking. There was just screaming and hollering and pointing out. And at one point, a little after midnight, a little after 3 o'clock, Jimmy Trimble hollered, "Grenades." Now the Japanese grenades didn't have a pin and a fly handle like we did. Their grenades, which were much smaller than ours and much weaker, some at the end of the war in Okinawa and parts of Iwo Jima were made out of course there was the iron, then there was the ones they made out of glass, and then they had them even made out of clay, like pottery, because they were running out of minerals. And anyway, what they would do is to ignite them, they would hit them together. And when you heard that click, you know grenades were coming. I didn't hear the click, but Trimble did, and he hollered grenades. Before that, they got close enough to bayonet him in the shoulder. And coming at me was another Japanese soldier. He was crawling, and he had in his hand what I thought was a stick of dynamite or plastique. It was oblong and dark. And he was crawling towards me. Well, anyway, the Trimble's wound wasn't that bad, and he kept firing. And I shot and blew away the Japanese who got within a couple feet of me. And I just reached over and grabbed what he had in his hand, and it was a wooden box, and I stuck it in my pocket. Well, anyway, grenades came flying in right near the foxhole, and one came in the foxhole, and it peppered Jimmy's back. It broke both of my legs, and came very close to, when I looked down, my crotch was just a bloody mess. And I pulled myself out of the hole, and Trimble, he was still alive, and I reached in to help pull him out, and and at the same time, the Japanese had looked like a baseball base. It was made out of canvas. It was about the same size as a baseball base, maybe 15 inches square. And in each corner was a magnet, and it was loaded with explosive. And they would put that on a tank and try to blow the tank. Well, this soldier had this strapped to his body, and he climbed in the hole. Of course, I saw what he had on. I rolled away. He pulled the cord. The mine went, they called it Mine 90, grenade 90, the Japanese did. and the Japanese just evaporated. And Trimble he was blown in half. The lower part of his body just separated completely. I was very fortunate that the two behind me, White and Blanchard, they came out of their hole. Blanchard picked me up, carried me back. White put on the tourniquets. He took my belt, took his belt, and he did something that he wasn't supposed to do. He took his bandages and did both my legs with my bandage and his bandages and put on sulfa drugs. And by this time it got to be about 4:30, and a corpsman came along and gave me a shot of morphine. And I can understand to this day how somebody becomes a heroin addict, because that morphine, even though I was banged up pretty good, that morphine just spreads a warm feeling over you, and you just completely relax, and the pain goes away. It's just marvelous. And they put a mark on your head, like they do for Catholics on Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. So they put a mark on your head so they know that you had a morphine shot and you don't get too many of them. Anyway, Corman gave me some plasma, and they carried me away down to what they would call on TV a MASH unit, a medical unit, where they bandaged me up and tried to set my legs, but it was just too much. And they shipped me. I was there 24 hours, and they shipped me down to the shore. They put me, the hospital ships were all crowded, and they put me on a troop ship, put me in the kitchen, and that's where they operated on me, and bound me up. And that's where I got a shot of penicillin. And it turned out that I'm allergic to penicillin. They wear the medallion, and every time I go in the hospital, I put big signs all over, allergic to penicillin, because I went into a coma for 10 or 11 days, and your blood pressure drops down to nothing, and your skin just peels right off. And I woke up on Saipan in an army hospital in a tent. From there, they flew me to Johnson Island, where Amelia Earhart is supposed to be. And then from Johnson Island, they flew me to Hawaii. And by this time, it was April 1st. And that was, I remember that, it was Easter Sunday. And it also was the day that they invaded Okinawa. And the hospital was so crowded in Hawaii that they put me in the VD ward. And because it was Sunday, everybody in that ward was mobile. They either went to the movies, went to eat, went for a walk, and I was there alone. And they said that a congressman was coming through. Well, under normal conditions, as a 17 or 18-year-old, I wouldn't have any idea who my congressman was. But I remember in newsreels that Franklin Roosevelt, who was in a wheelchair, every time he came to address Congress, he would stop and talk to a congressman who was in a wheelchair, and that's how his name was Crosley, and that was my congressman, and that's how I knew when I saw the congressman that it was Congressman Crosley. And he came over and he said, "How would you like to go?" Asked me where I was, and I told him, "You're my congressman. I'm from Cleveland, the East Side." He said, "How would you like to go home?" I said, "Sure." He says, "Would you like to go today?" I said, "I sure would." Well, I didn't go that day. I went the next day. And I was on the first plane that flew from, that had Iwo casualties on it, and flew into Oakland Naval Hospital. From there, I went to Sun Valley Rehab. From there, I went to Great Lakes. From there, I went to the Marine Hospital in Cleveland, there's no such thing as a U.S. Marine hospital. This was a merchant Marine hospital. And I recuperated there, and life went on after that.
You had several more surgeries, from what I understand.
My last operation ended in 1982, and 2 women operated on me. And what saved me was, that's when the CAT scan came out. Before that, when they would operate for shrapnel, they would poke you, and then they would glue a paper clip to where they thought the shrapnel, but they didn't know how deep it was. And you know how a CAT scan works. It's one X-ray after another, and they can 3D it, and they were able to spot what was really troubling me and take out the pieces that were embedded and weren't moving. And I haven't been back. Haven't had an operation since. They're little pieces of volcanic ash that come out, but it's just like a pimple. With my fingernail, I can flick it out. And I did have braces. I got rid of them one by one. And unfortunately, I did get some gangrene infection that held me up for a while. And back in 1945 and 1946, you got to remember, therapy was bed rest. If they could get you in a whirlpool bath, and they would give you a back rub with Jergens lotion. That was it. There was no getting out of bed right after the operation. There was no moving after the cast came off. It was all bed rest. So it took me a little while to get organized.
Last question here in our last minute or so, maybe 2 minutes. Since that time, you've also been very active in honoring the memory of Jimmy Trimble, both at the American Veterans Center and elsewhere. Talk about how you took on that role and what it means to you.
Well, with the American Veterans Center and with the St. Albans, where he went to prep school, we started a scholarship. And the last count that we had raised was $250,000. And it's for I hope a Marine, but they'll take any son of a serviceman. Then we also instigated the Young Marine Award, every year an annual award that I donate to. The American Veterans Center and I, they send the outstanding women Young Marine and men Young Marine. Now, this is not the real Marines, these are like the Boy Scout Marines.
Right.
And they're honored at the banquet. And the American Veterans Center holds every year. And I just continue in tribute. I'm the head of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. I have in West Palm Beach, Florida, I have the second largest, I have 414 members. And the biggest award I ever got, beside a Purple Heart, was 2009. I received from the Pentagon the World War II Service and Community Service Award. Bob Feller got one, I got one, and a movie star, Hugh O'Brien, I think I got one too. And I'm here today, 89 years old, and feel like $1 million.
Well, you look great, and your story is incredible. Thank you. I know it's been a long day for you. Thank you very much for sharing your story again with us.
Okay.
Don Mates, veteran of World War II, Battle of Guam and Iwo Jima, U.S. Marine Corps veteran, 3rd Division. I'm Greg Columbus. This has been Veterans Chronicles.